All right, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you to everyone joining us today from across the country and around the world. I'm Michael Higgs here at Conscious Capitalism. We appreciate you taking time to learn and grow in community with us today. Today, we are joined by Kent Gregoire and Brendan Johnson to discuss how executives can achieve ongoing personal and professional success by building holistic businesses. As many of you know, conscious capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of capitalism and business. It is a movement of business leaders around the world working to change the practice and perception of capitalism to elevate humanity. And Conscious Capitalism, Inc. is a nonprofit organization dedicated to catalyzing that movement. Every week, we're offering virtual gatherings as a way for the community to see how the philosophy takes shape in the leadership journeys and the business practices of those in our network. Today's gathering will run about 60 minutes. Kent and Brendan will be in conversation for about 40, and then we'll transition to audience questions for the last 10 to 15 minutes of our session. Please type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical issues or questions, please email us at info@consciouscapitalism.org. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Kent Gregoire is one of 7 certified conscious capitalism consultants around the world, as well as the founder and CEO of Symphony Advantage. In addition to his consulting work with Symphony, Kent is a serial entrepreneur, an angel investor in purpose-driven companies, and a sought-after speaker in the US and beyond. Brendan Johnson is president and owner of TekDoc Solutions. He started his company in 2004 as one person helping friends and family with their IT needs. Since then, it has grown into a full-service managed IT provider with a dynamic 15-person team. Welcome, Kent and Brendan. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. So as we get started today, I want to share about how Brendan and I met. Usually when companies and individuals turn to me for help, the company has a pretty strong desire to lead with purpose, and they're interested in how to begin implementation of one or more of the 4 pillars of conscious capitalism to help them continue on the path of growth and sustainability. However, with Brendan, it was just a bit different when he reached out to me. Conscious capitalism, in fact, had little, if nothing at all, to do with it at the time. The company's survival was of concern, and Brendan's goal was to make sure that they were moving in a direction to turn it around quickly. Profit margins and, like a lot of companies, cost reductions were front and center in their minds. Well, purpose, caring culture, stakeholder management, and conscious leadership were not. However, as we began doing this work together and beginning to show progress on a path to profitability that was also based on long-term sustainability, I was able to share some of conscious capitalism. That created an incredible opportunity for within him, which we're going to hear about, a renewed purpose within himself and the company to put them on a solid ground to thrive. So today we're going to explore what happened for Brendan, what caused that shift, taking a look at the old paradigm and working in the new evolving thinking that we all are embarking on through our journey with conscious capitalism. So Brendan, as we begin to open up today's session, which I'm absolutely just delighted we have this opportunity to do, I mentioned that TekDoc had been going through some challenges, and that's why you approached me. Can you provide some additional context about these challenges and which areas of the business were most problematic to you at the time that you reached out to me?
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to ask these questions. Very excited to be here. And, conscious capitalism is a very new topic, a new mindset for me. I mean, I've always kind of known like what kind of company I want to have and what kind of company I'm doing and running. But, there's definitely some huge challenges. And I mean, one of the main reasons why I reached out to Kent was I was kind of looking for guidance in terms of like, a new direction. Because I've been running this company since 2004, doing business to consumer, and then eventually translated into business to business. But like what I didn't know was like some of these challenges along the way and how you can actually solve them. So one of the challenges I definitely had was I had to form a business partner, and he actually was one of my best friends growing up. So it was very much like hanging out with my best friend, and he's really good with business mindset and how you kind of like put some structure, I guess, to my company. He acted kind of like a second in command, and that he that worked for about 3 years. He helped me pivot the company into subscription revenue and whatnot. But one of the challenges was he actually became an equity partner in my business. And to me, having the friendship to me was more important than even running or, TekDoc itself, because, the people are really important to me. So I ended up going through a buyout, which at the time I had no idea how substantial it would be. To me, we just picked a number and we went with it. And I said, this is what I'll pay you over the next 3 years or so to buy out the business, or your stake in the business. And the biggest challenge for that, I didn't know it at the time, really was, how it's going to impact cash flow. And one thing that became very clear to me was, early on, it's like, this isn't going to work. So, I brought on, some of the challenges that we were going through, from buying out a former business partner to how do you manage cash flow. There's a lot of stuff I didn't really understand until I started working with a consultant and understanding a little bit more. At the time, I did not know the concept of conscious capitalism or even what that meant. So it's something new to me, and I'm still on that evolution and that journey right now. I'm very excited to be on it because, as I'll share with you guys as we go through this, things change and evolve. So you wonder why things happen, and it's really hard to like pinpoint exactly when it's happening, but it is happening behind the scenes. So kind of navigating my former business partner buyout, renegotiating terms on that to a term that made sense. And then ultimately I ended up being able to go back to my former business partner to get more capital. And then I was able to buy a building. I was actually really excited about that because that was something that was important to me.
So, Brendan, one of the things that may be helpful, and I recall this happening pretty well, you were very pleased when you met with the prior business partner. And if I recall, one of the things you had to do was to lay out to him your plan. And if I recall also, based on your feedback, he was really impressed with how you were developing this plan and taking stakeholder considerations and keeping them front and center so that everybody was being treated really well. But he came and he was willing to work through a program with you, and maybe tell us a little bit about why that was so important. What was it that happened? Because that was a very big payment, but what caused him to shift his mindset around, I'm willing to be a part of this with you, and as a stakeholder, I'm willing to help all stakeholders and the company to thrive. What was that moment?
That moment to me was really when I just sat down, and I mean, I came to him because I didn't quite, understand at the time that I couldn't afford the monthly cash flow. And basically, I presented a plan and, started to build up that level of trust over time. And that level of trust just ultimately, pulled everything together so that like he kind of bought in. And early on, though, I didn't even understand the term stakeholder orientation. I always thought, hey, this is just a payment to my former business partner, and that's it. It was very cut and dry to me. It wasn't like, oh, he's actually a stakeholder in my business, and he wants to see me be successful, because ultimately that means he will become successful in what he wants, which is to get paid.
Yeah, your approach made such a big difference in that relationship and how that made one of the stakeholder tensions that had to be resolved. And there were several of them, and you did a really phenomenal job at guiding that. We're going to move us on. I have another question. So, initially we worked on addressing critical aspects for the company's survival. It's only after a few months that I discussed with you, as we mentioned earlier, about conscious capitalism. What part of that message resonated with you and why?
One of the big things that resonated with me was, it was one was stakeholder orientation. understanding that there's multiple pieces that are part of this whole picture. It's not just about the business. It's not just about me. It's actually about the customers. It's about the employees. It's about everybody working together. So that was number one. And then number two was just some of these new terminologies and terms, tensions, transparency, trust, just understanding what the underlying messages are and how to deliver them is all just new to me, but that kind of is helping me shape the company, which has been awesome.
So, in speaking of the other stakeholders, what are some of the ways in which you've begun exploring your relationship with clients and business partners? Have there been scenarios in which you've been able to really create more value and either have already or are beginning to consistently execute against that new value?
One thing that has been huge for us is very early on in the pandemic, we implemented something called Daily Huddles. These Daily Huddles, they're 10 minutes every day. The entire company is on them, and it's created a large form of upward communication in that the employees are not afraid to say what they need help with or what they learned the previous day. So the Daily Huddles have been huge in building the trust among the employees themselves.
Mhm. So, you mentioned upward communication, and in that process, helping employees. Did that also do something for you? Did it make you feel safer? Was it just simply information? What was it that's going on for you in terms of the upward communication through the huddle process?
It made me feel safer in terms of how the company was running, how the employees were becoming engaged, or even not engaged in the company. But it allowed me to see kind of the evolution of how we used to be in an office to how we're a complete remote company, and how we can function on teams, and how the issues and the challenges really solve each other, solved on a daily basis as opposed to waiting once a month or once a quarter.
So you mentioned tensions, and one of the areas I recall when I was first working with you and members of the team were some challenges that were taking place between two areas. And it's been very open within the company, and that at that time, it was service delivery and the account management team, each playing an extremely important role. Service delivery, doing the work specifically for the client, whether it's from roadmap, from a technology roadmap, all the way through execution and help desk, and your account managers from the standpoint of understanding the journey that the clients are on and addressing how to continue to help them grow and use the tools even more. But there was this tension going on. There was definitely a sense of conflict and lack of cooperation. So where is that today? But actually, bring us through, what did that look like for you? What might it look like for the client? Maybe what wasn't working so well? What was the process used to begin to resolve those tensions?
Yeah, I mean, it was so basically the account managers and the service delivery team were operating in silos. They were completely not talking to each other. There was not open transparency about what they were working on, ultimately trying to serve the client in two different directions. And that tension really comes to a head when, the clients are not happy with the service that they're receiving. So in resolving some of these tensions, we did a bunch of exercises that helped us to build some more transparency and trust, namely in the form of experiments. And these experiments were presented, by the members of the different teams in terms of trying to resolve a specific issue that we may have had, or trying to bring them together. And the micro experiments, might be a week or two, or it might even be a month.
hmm So you ran these experiments. What was an example of an experiment? What might have been happening? Is there in terms of giving recognition to others? Um,
One experiment we ran was we had one employee created something called a props channel. And then the props channel really is just where one employee can praise another employee, or, give recognition when due. And we actually tried an experiment where we did video props as opposed to just words. And, that was, I mean, it was short lived, but it was very influential to awesome to see that the employee would take time to actually deliver a video message thanking
mhm,
another employee.
mhm. So we've been having this conversation because it leads me to the next question, and that is, among the 4 tenets of conscious capitalism, you spoke about, stakeholder orientation. Stakeholder capitalism was definitely up front and center for you. But I know that you've very much gravitated toward the aspect of caring culture, and a lot of focus has been on caring culture. Tell us about what that looked like. What does that journey look like, and for you and the company?
Yeah, I mean, one thing you may not know about me is I actually had hearing aids growing up. And from the hearing aids, I had difficulty hearing. And about 5, 6 years ago is when I got a cochlear implant. But I would always pay very close attention to the physical cues, the facial expressions that people were giving. And, so I really was very conscious of that. So I really, I care about the culture, I care about the employees, I care about my clients. And then I would say, caring about myself in terms of stakeholder was lowest on the list. But the caring culture is like, it resonates with me through all of our core values and bringing the team together in terms of the company and how we function and how we operate.
hmm So recently, it's become more in terms of communicating. You've been communicating with the team around higher purpose. And I know that you're going through a process of internally kind of testing the higher purpose after receiving a lot of iterations of feedback from employees and others. And it's to help, at the end of the day, TekDoc's purpose is to help employees thrive in their lives. So what are some of the ways that you are now seeing that show up, even though it's been maybe only directly communicated recently? I know you've been speaking of it for months. Even when I've had opportunities to be talking with employees, it's been coming out. But it's starting to show up. And what are some of the ways that you're seeing it show up today? And then when we think about thriving in people's lives, or that people's lives are thriving, excuse me, that there have been things that you've done in the past with employees to help them live an even larger life.
Yeah, I mean, having run in the company from since 2004, I've definitely seen a lot along the lines. I had an employee who worked for me for about 5.5, 6 years. He was actually my number one, my first employee here at TekDoc. And so he worked for me for 5 or 6 years, and then he decided it was time to take a break and go work for someone else. And he ultimately took about 5 or 6 years off. And about 2 years ago, he actually approached me. I've known him since he was like, I don't know, 8, 9 years old. So we go way back in the day. And he approached me back in November and, just kind of looking to check in, grab some lunch. And it ultimately took about a month and a half before we actually sat down. And when we sat down for lunch, he knew exactly what he wanted, which was crystal clear to him. I didn't know what he was looking for. I knew he was a really smart individual, and I would love to have him come back to my company. But he told me that he wanted to work 3 days a week. And then 2 days a week, he wanted to be an airline pilot and go through the whole training program, the hours, and the certification. And ultimately, I was able to welcome him back to TekDoc. He's been here for almost 2 years now, and he's able to pursue his passion, his dream, which is to be basically a commercial airline pilot, and still help TekDoc in the meantime.
Mhm. So you've had a pattern of being able to do that. I would share with those listening that you have a superpower of being able to help individuals understand their deeper passions, and there have been other instances you've helped support them. And do you think that helped you shape the purpose in which the company is moving toward?
Absolutely. It's something I didn't even know really existed. I've always been focused on mission, vision, values, and all of that. But having a higher purpose is just something a little bit different in terms of helping us think about the company and how we operate as a business.
Mhm. Do you feel that you'll be using the higher purpose as a true north, and that kind of when you wake up in the morning and think about the contribution that you're making, and perhaps you've already done this, that you're going to begin to look or more specifically think about that metric to try to measure that higher purpose, and what are you doing today to help bring that alive even more in the organization so that employees in their lives, they continue to thrive?
Absolutely. You know, I mean, I'm an Eagle Scout, so I understand, you know, navigating, being in the outside and, you know, moving around and trying to figure out, but without some kind of direction, it's hard to figure out where you're going. And, you know, this higher purpose that we've been working on, this evolution of where we got to now has been, you know, challenging, but it is awesome seeing a direction and kind of where we're heading.
Mhm. If I recall, perhaps one of the biggest challenges with the higher purpose was really in allowing others in the organization to truly understand what it means and how to get to that process. Early iterations of higher purpose were still very much almost about how we're going to go do something. And so being great at delivering IT solutions seemed to be where we were stuck. Can you think of what might have begun to create the shift, or what kind of things were happening in the organization beyond creating awareness around it? Was there any pivotal moment that you think made a big difference in shifting people's mindsets to think bigger and to think about the impact to either society, planet, in your case, to your workforce, and to be a representative of workforces in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just take a step back though. We started these higher purpose discussions back in June of last year. You know, it's taken 6 to 9 months to even get to where we are today. And one of the huge impacts that I'm starting to notice is employees are generating their own ideas. They're coming up with new streams of revenue all on their own. It's incredible to see. I mean, we're looking at building out a cybersecurity program within our IT service division. Because some employees are passionate about it. So they're bringing their own ideas and experiences that they have had, whether it's at previous companies or building on their own, and kind of bringing that to TekDoc without my direct attention. That's
Mhm.
pretty amazing to see happen.
So that would go along the lines of, a good, caring, and culture of trust. Also, an aspect of, certainly the innovation, the creativity, the execution against those to create new value for clients. What about the aspect of learning and growing? What's happening in the organization today, and how does that contrast with either 8 months ago or 2 years ago, whatever reference point, or what's happened and why? How is it showing up for each other internally, and how is it showing up for your clients?
Yeah, so the upward communication within the company has just been huge. Employees are, you know, bringing their own ideas to the table. They're talking about what they learn in the daily huddles. They're talking about how awesome it is to work here as opposed to like a previous company that they may have worked for. You know, one of my employees worked for a previous company for about 5 or 6 years, and then he came over to TekDoc and he said it's awesome to see a company that's like focused on caring culture and, you know, helping the employees learn and grow as opposed to just being a profit center.
Right. So it's interesting because I know what employee you're talking about. I was in that meeting, and his description of the prior company was a company that was very much focused on, high levels of productivity, getting more and more and more done, and it was very, all about the profits. How do you think he would have done in the culture, let's say a year ago or 2 years ago? What would he maybe feeling in the company versus today?
I would say, you know, probably, you know, there's definitely ups and downs. You know, sometimes it's like going really well, and sometimes it feels like, "Well, what's going on here? What are we working on?" You know, so there's kind of a sense of chaos, I guess. You know, we're all working together, but we don't have that same direction that we're all going in.
You're saying that you
Um,
didn't have it, or you don't have it
Correct.
today? Yeah, didn't have it. Okay.
Did not have that. So, you know, a year ago, it would have been like, you know, what's the purpose of coming to work every day? You know, not really understanding that.
Mhm. So now with this kind of this sense of renewed purpose, there's obviously a lot of work, we know because we've talked about a lot of work to be done and to build on it and create that momentum. One of the areas of caring, a caring culture, and one of trust is to create community and more loyalty. But also it means helping everybody truly learn and grow. What are some of the ways in which employees are taking initiative on their own? Are there any plans in the future to help support employees in learning and growing? Are there any daily activities that are specifically happening, whether minor or not, across the company? What's happening to help these employees' lives and that they thrive in their lives even more?
One thing we're doing is we're doing a weekly happy hour, and during these weekly happy hours, there's no sense of there's no direct questions that we're trying to ask. It's really just about getting to know other people and caring about who you're working with and learning more about what interests them, not just at work but outside of work.
Mhm.
So it's really cool to see that kind of come together.
So you're speaking there of, the kind of the caring aspect of culture, and the importance of knowing each other and getting to know people on a personal basis. Have you seen any direct results, or anything that would lead you to believe that's creating a community in which people are really bonding and more loyal to each other?
Absolutely. I see some of the employees on these happy hours, they're getting to know each other. And, more specifically, we had a long-term employee that had been with us for a long time. And we scheduled a 1 hour, Microsoft Teams meeting where we just had lunch delivered to everyone, and we just talked about the great things that this person had brought to the company.
Mhm.
And it was, go ahead.
I was going to say, so, that it certainly made the employee that was moving off to an opportunity that was something not going to be available at the company, TekDoc. So, in supporting that employee and the celebration around the opportunity that they have, do you think that moment in time within that Microsoft Teams meeting, when employees started sharing how she helped them grow and what the relationship meant to each of them? Do you think that also had any impact on a caring culture?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it brought people closer together because, we're all in this together. Even through COVID times, realizing that we can still talk to people, we can still pick up the phone, and it's just awesome to see people melt, kind of when they're talking to other people.
hmm So, would you say that now, from a caring culture point of view, that employees are feeling a higher level of being cared for, not conditional upon, let's say, performance? And is there anything you can cite? Is there any example that you can think of?
Can you repeat the question just a little bit?
Sure. I probably didn't ask it as a question, which I will do a better job for one. But I'm thinking about the caring culture, and as employees feeling cared about, do they really feel cared about independent of their performance? Have you seen any examples? Does anything come to mind where an employee may have, for example, reached out to another employee when they were having a challenge, or anything at all that would really express to the employee that maybe needed a little bit more help and support at that time, that others in the organizations really care about them, even if outside of their supervisor?
Yeah, I mean, I see it every day in the Daily Huddle. People are having challenges and problems that they're trying to solve, and then other employees are like, "Hey, reach out to me. I'll help you with that." Or, "Did you try this or try that?" When it comes to trying to solve specific problems that
hmm
they don't know how to do. So it's really cool to see that upward communication in terms of employees helping each other.
hmm So another thing, thinking about, you've mentioned the Daily Huddle, and if I recall from my observation of the Daily Huddle, that it starts off with, what did you learn yesterday, and how are you going to use that in the future to create that opportunity for learning and growing? I know that was added at the beginning of the year, and several months ago, your weekly meetings for each of the areas was brought about, and those weekly meetings. Also included not just people from a particular area, but even cross area like service delivery and account management, or bringing various people together from a sales team perspective. And that I've observed, and you've shared with me the impact of it, that these meetings and the way in which you've shifted to an upward communication and wanting to make sure that you're seeing everybody have the opportunity to bring the brilliance out and grow, I'm not aware that you've actually been giving any real direction to your team other than the true north. Is that really working? Is it happening the way I just understand it? And is it really working? And what opportunity does that potentially create for the organization? And specifically, what opportunity does that create to helping employees thrive in their lives?
I mean, to me, it really creates, that sense of caring culture, people caring about what they do, why they come to work, and, learning and growing, and it just increases the value of what everybody brings to the table.
hmm So I know something that some organizations will talk a lot about, and we certainly do in the conscious culture of in conscious leadership around teaming and self-management, and being at things like taking risks to grow. Right? Those are common conversations. What is what is it that you want to see happen for your team that's also a benefit to you as an entrepreneur?
I love seeing employees solve problems and solve challenges on their own, without basically needing to reach out to me all of the time. And, back in the day, I used to be involved in almost every major decision, but now the employees are empowered to make those decisions on their own, or at least present solutions that kind of make sense.
hmm So, would you say that that the team is starting to be more self-managed? We've heard if they are, we're hearing some of the potential benefits being, well, the word innovation is a pretty big word, but they're being more creative and coming up with new value for stakeholders. That could be with clients, that could be for each other internally, and even a business partner. Which I think you may have something to share there as well. You shared a story with me about a business partner recently, where it supported growing and learning also.
I'm just thinking how that might work. Sorry, I'm drawing a blank right now.
Yeah, so business partner that's helping to support the organization and also has a responsibility of supporting your clients. Um, and there was an offering made by the business partner to if something was done, which in conscious capitalism in the stakeholder world, we'd say, well, that's a trade-off. And it was like, yeah, if somebody's not doing this, you should penalize them. But that created a conversation for you to get closer to that stakeholder and begin to draw that stakeholder toward the purpose and more in alignment with stakeholder capitalism, to avoid making trade-offs. So you brought out, and other members of the team were really talking about, instead of being, recently I learned a little bit and a tiny bit about polarities, but kind of the suggestion was before, well, it's kind of this, or it's this, or it's a penalty. But you saw something that had an and between it. If we do this with our clients and their employees are going to grow, and that growing helps support workplaces, but it also meant that there were going to be less tickets. So I think that had to do with your key business partner, who also from time to time comes in on the leadership team.
My former business partner?
No,
No.
I was talking about a provider too. I obviously need to leave names out of this, but I was talking about a provider in a story that you were sharing recently. And the provider was saying, well, if they're not going to go online and do the training and understand how to use the tools, and tickets keep coming in that they could have resolved just by taking a little bit of learning, then you should actually penalize them when they need support.
I gotcha.
And all of a sudden it created an opportunity, and that looked like a trade-off. So it was a way for you to connect even deeper with this really important stakeholder of yours and come up with a better solution. And why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because that was one of the points in which I saw a real big opportunity and a shift in thinking at TekDoc around managing stakeholders and how to integrate them within the purpose and within the mission of the company.
And so, I mean, one of the providers that we had actually had a tool that would enable us to basically provide training videos to our customers and our employees. And we didn't really recognize that, we had this tool available. So basically with these training videos, we're able to allow us to, send these videos to our clients after we may do a new service install for them or something to help them learn more about what the services provide, whether it be around, training on Office 365 or some of these Microsoft tools, how to use Microsoft Teams as an example. And, utilizing the client or the vendor helped us enable us to support the clients in terms of learning and growing and understanding more about these services. So it was kind of a really good match between recognizing that one of our vendors could do this to help solve a challenge and implementing new services for our clients.
So it sounds like it could help with a challenge. It also sounds like what a great win-win in terms of being able to help your clients' employees continue to grow, because the opportunities were not just how to use the everyday aspect of the tools, but the tools for many do so much more. So creates the opportunity for those employees to grow. So instead of actually, and there's a fee I know for this training. So instead of actually having to take away and say, well, if you're not, if you're not going to do the training, to actually find ways to create opportunities in which your clients would be rewarded for doing training. And so I thought that was a great example of recognizing a stakeholder trade-off and beginning to have those conversations with that supplier, vendor, that advisor, that business partner. Um, Regarding the Ask Me Anything meetings, you kind of gave reference to this earlier in terms of the happy hour, but you started off having Ask Me Anything meetings. How did these evolve? What happened? And I know they took a turn, and what does that turn actually represent?
I mean, they asked me anything. I feel like, the employees were kind of in the dark. They didn't really understand, or they didn't feel comfortable bringing up situations or challenges that they were having. So the Ask Me Anything meeting was really an open discussion. Anything you want to ask, you can ask, whether it's for me or one of the employees or anything. And I think as we had two or three of them, it was interesting to see that the questions actually started to not exist, meaning the employees didn't have anything to talk about.
Mhm.
And that was just really interesting to see how that evolved.
Mhm. Was the reason for those Ask Me Anything meetings because there was this sense of trust and kind of transparency? Was that what was creating that opportunity? And maybe there was something else.
I mean, it's like what we know, we don't know. So, the transparency and trust, I think, the employees just wanted to, be able to be heard and, trust in what they're going to do and the work that they do.
Mhm.
And ultimately, go ahead.
So with the upward communication process, and then the opportunity for not just you, but for others who actually had knowledge and information, the freedom to be able to share it, is that one of the payoffs that ultimately came out that caused the Ask Me Anything meetings not to be really needed anymore? I know there were some experiments after that, but is that what caused them to essentially not have many questions coming to them? In fact, I think you reported you got down to the point where nobody had any questions, and they were beginning to have other conversations, but they didn't feel like they were missing information anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the Ask Me Anything ultimately ended up becoming the Daily Huddle.
Mhm.
So the Daily Huddle ultimately allowed for the employees to have upward communication and raise any issues, challenges, concerns that they were having in real time.
Mhm.
Every week, if they had something or a challenge they were working on, it would allow them to say and express, what they're feeling and how they're thinking and what they're working on. So the
Mhm.
Daily Huddle ultimately replaced the Ask Me Anything meeting. But it was interesting to see the evolution of how that came to be because, the first Ask Me Anything meeting, everybody was on, they all had questions. And then all of a sudden, there was that shift and everybody was just asking questions and solving problems and challenges in the Daily Huddle.
Mhm. I think we're about at time for Q&A, but I had one more question. A lot of the focus in the company and creating the opportunity for huddles and weekly meetings was a process that you had started probably a couple years before I started working with you, and the operating system itself. One of the things along the way became apparent that the operating system wasn't going to, maybe in structure, maybe the system itself, the way in which you organized information, but the kinds of questions that are being asked and the decision-making models were really serving itself and serving profit. And there's been a shift toward looking outside, looking to the stakeholders and bringing that information back in and flowing back out to create new value. Do is that something, I know it's fairly new, and the team is working through the process, but is there something about that that's important to you, or that's an area in which you're continuing to learn about? What's happening for you there?
It's definitely an area we're continuing to learn and grow in. The operating system, as we discovered before, was kind of incomplete. It didn't really help with growing a caring culture or stakeholders. It really had to be, identifying core issues, coming up with solutions, and then ultimately felt like it was more profit driven than caring culture or stakeholder orientation.
Mhm. And
So it's definitely an evolution, and it's a new concept of what we're learning about, because we very much ran on this operating system for, I don't know, the greater 5 to 7 years.
so it's been quite a while. So a big shift, and a lot of people are having to begin to relearn. So I think we're probably at Q&A. Is that right, Michael?
Yes, indeed we are. It's just a reminder for all of our attendees. If you'd like to ask any questions of Kent or Brendan, just please type your questions into the Q&A box in the lower portion of the Zoom interface. Brendan, I'd love to lead with a question. I am fascinated by something that you mentioned early on, and you've highlighted throughout this conversation a few times, and it's this notion of experiments, or these things that you're running in the organization. We heard about the stand-up meeting. You mentioned also I believe it was a Slack channel for appreciation, for employees to appreciate one another. Are there any other experiments that you're currently running in your organization that our audience might appreciate hearing about?
We've ran a lot of experiments, and to be honest with you, they were very hard early on because we didn't really have the right people managing the processes and whatnot. But in terms of direct experiments, we're not currently running any, but we do bring them together. The experiments that really worked were the ones that helped to bring account management and service delivery together, which was the ultimate impact. But it's hard to go back and say what experiment or what thing is really what changed it, because it's really just an evolution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we have a couple questions coming in from our audience. And Martino is asking the question, in your experience, what company areas develop conscious capitalism mindset quicker? And why do you think so? So, I think across your organization, who in the organization did the message of conscious capitalism land with fastest, and why?
I mean, I thought it would be me at first, but I really think it's the employees themselves that are really starting to embrace this idea of conscious capitalism, and I'm like getting on board with it. It's because it's a whole new mindset and a way of thinking for me personally. But it's interesting to see how the employees are bringing up different areas of caring culture or stakeholder orientation, because we've kind of built it into the culture of the company.
Mm-hmm. We have a second question here from an anonymous attendee. What were your top 2 challenges you faced when starting up TekDoc?
The first challenge was, what am I going to offer? Well, I guess, I was doing IT services. So it's like, who is my customer going to be? Who is the ideal customer? And what does that relationship look like? Meaning I ultimately started off business to consumer because all these people at home were calling me for IT support. But the biggest challenge really was identifying the customer and, what that customer going to look like, not just then, but in 3 years from now. And ultimately ended up not being the same customer. So all that evolution led me to where I am today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You know, it's definitely hard to see what the evolution of the customer looks like as the business grows.
Mm-hmm. I have a second question related to that. I think one of the things that you shared earlier in the conversation was that the stakeholder orientation tenet resonated with you most when Kent had begun his process of introducing conscious capitalism to you. I'm curious, how has that approach affected your relationships with vendors? We've heard a few stories throughout, but I'm wondering if you just touch on that. I know that in the IT space, vendor relationships are critical for doing your business. So I'm just wondering how you've observed those relationships change with that stakeholder mindset.
Yeah, I mean, the vendors that care about TekDoc and how we do are definitely, or how we do what we do are definitely top of mind for vendors. You know, we've had different vendors over the years. They've kind of faded away. So basically, there's been some vendor consolidation in terms of, you know, we're working with 2 to 3 really awesome vendors. So the stakeholder orientation kind of helps us create this true north alignment between the vendors that actually have a stake in how well TekDoc does, as well as we have a stake in how well the vendors do in terms of us reselling or selling their services. So that's just been, and that's just a huge difference in mindset for me. We're recognizing that the vendors, the customers, everybody has an equal stake in this. It's just not just about me running the company.
Mm-hmm. And a final question from me. I'm wondering, you know, I think organizationally we do truly believe that the conscious capitalist is forever on the journey of practicing conscious capitalism. I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to where you find yourself if conscious capitalism were a map, and there's you know, a theoretical endpoint. Where might you find yourself on the journey right now?
So like, let's say Boston, Massachusetts, where I live, is home. I'd say right now I'm probably in Alaska. You know, I understand how to get home, but I don't know quite how to get there yet. But I'm understanding all these different pieces that are coming together. But it's like, okay, now I got to get on a boat and sail across the ocean to get back to the U.S. or drive a train or something.
I was going to say there's no fast way from Alaska to Boston, so much work ahead.
Exactly.
I wanted to give the audience an opportunity to ask any other questions that you may have at this point. Kent, if there's anything else that you would like to add as a question to Brendan, or
I don't know that I have a question. I thought I might share a little bit. I think this is just you know, I would say a remarkable story, because it began from what we talked about, where an individual had no knowledge of probably even the word conscious capitalism, although I may have mentioned it. I'm not sure that Brendan had actually known it before. So as we went through this journey, one of the things is that I was pretty engaged, very engaged from time to time. And that's what has allowed Brendan to make this shift and to move through it. It required him to really, you know, have the grit and put in the time and the effort. There's been a lot of coaching, a lot of hand holding, a lot of nurturing, not just with Brendan, but other members of the team. But the payoff is already showing up in ways in which would be quite unpredictable. We could talk about it from the standpoint, myself as being, you know, a certified consultant. We could say these are all the things that we would expect to happen. How they happen and in what order, I think is actually not always predictable. And I'm actually really pleased at how far Brendan has been able to move for himself in the consciousness from a leader and working through the other tenets. I'm extremely, to some extent, surprised, not because the employees aren't capable, but frankly, not having experience in seeing where a group of 15 employees are actually all jumping in to, in their own way, learn about conscious capitalism, whether it be read books or they've had some great other kinds of learnings beyond the webinars. And Brendan's in a peer group with Conscious Capitalists, and I think that's making a really big stride for him as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much. Ken, I really thank you for your questions. Brendan, thank you for opening, sharing with us your organization and how things are working for you, having embedded conscious capitalism into your company. I want to ask everyone who's joining us to please take 30 seconds to fill out the survey in the chat box. This will help us with our future virtual gatherings. I also want to say, if you're new to Conscious Capitalism, please visit consciouscapitalism.org/start-here. I will go ahead and put that in the chat as well. There you can find some more information about our organization and our movement. And I also want to mention, hope to see all of you next week here for Brian Buck and Kwame Dow's session, A Win-Win Approach to Negotiating with Stakeholders. So once again, Ken, Brendan, thank you so much for joining us, and to all of our attendees. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Michael.